good morning, good morning. I take it since the movies stopped that we're now live. So welcome all you folks out there. It's Peter Duncan from MicroSeismic Inc. welcoming you to this our seventh forum virtual talk for 2025. You may recall that we kind of happened into this when our user forum, our annual event, got canceled because of snow back in January, snow in Houston. And we had all these nice talks lined up, so we decided to do them, put them out on the third Thursday of every month. And we've been having such fun at it and gotten such a great response that we've decided to continue it throughout this year. And we've actually already started booking talks for next year. Today, we're featuring our own John McKenna, and I'm going to introduce him a little bit more. But I wanted to tell you about our upcoming talks. Next month, we have Dr. Molly Turco from Devon Energy, who's going to speak on the unexpected reach of strike-slip faulting. This is something we run into in our practice. Strike-slip faulting excited by fracking that can cause wellbore damage, and Molly's going to give us a great presentation on that. And you can see the panels and talks that we're going to have for the rest of the year. I want to let you know that all of these talks are being recorded, and you can get them on our website. You can go back all the way to January when we had Arjun Murthy talk, a great talk, or you can visit with Bill Von Gonten and his treatment of the vaca muerta. Again, they are on our website. You go to the archives of past talks on demand and you can get them. You can also register for our next talk, for Molly's talk or whatever, using this QR code, which we're going to put up here for just a second, and I will show again at the end of this presentation. I do want to say while this is up that after John's talk, there will be a Q&A time. If you'd like to ask a question, please write it into the Q&A. You tap on that button that says Q&A at the top and you can write the question in. We have disabled the chat, so you won't be able to write in there. We can also, if you raise your hand and you unmute your mic, we could take, as I recognize you, we could take an oral talk. So today's talk by John McKenna, our own John McKenna. John is a geological engineer, geologist degree and geophysics degree from Georgia, and then a PhD from the Colorado School of Mines. John's been with us for as long as I can remember, looking from a geomechanical aspect at our results, our microseismic results, and helping us interpret what they mean in terms of the stress regime in the earth that you're fracking. I suspect John has looked at more fracs and frac events from a geomechanical aspect than anybody else in the world. And we're looking forward to his talk today, where he's going to share some of what he's learned over the past 20 years. I do want to say that when he's not working for us, he's out kayaking. He lives in Eastern Tennessee now, where you all know there's lots of lakes and rivers, and he says he's been on more than 100 rivers. I'm not going to question him on that, but I do reserve the right to question him on the geomechanics after he's given his talk. And so with that, John, I'm going to turn it over to you. We're looking forward to your comments and to the questions afterwards. Take it away.
Great. Thank you, Peter. I appreciate that introduction. And yeah, the title of my talk is Optimizing EUR, or Estimated Ultimate Recovery through Advanced Microseismic Monitoring Techniques. And I'll also be demonstrating your return of investment of your initial monitoring costs. So there are some upfront monitoring costs associated with permitting, and then the monitoring, and then the processing. But I'll talk about how you can get how long it takes to get a return of your investment of those costs. And so I'm going to break up this talk into 3 parts. The first part is going to be dealing with current problems that we have in today. The first one's going to be on decreasing wellbore spacing, tightening up, adding another well per drilling spacing unit. The second one's going to be on how to successfully refrac a parent well and refrac the entire parent well, and then immediately taking advantage of that pressured up parent well and and treating your infill offset child wells. And then if you don't have these current problems and you have continuous acreage, we'll talk about how you can do it right from now on, and how treatment order really matters in getting the best bang for your buck for treating your wells. And finally, the last one will be on hazard avoidance, how you can avoid geohazards. And we're going to be talking about how you increase your EUR. And if you look at these first 4 examples, we get a return of investment right around the 1 to 2 month mark. So pretty amazing. And then finally, the geohazard one, if you avoid losing production from even one well, from wellbore casing and deformation of your well or your entire pad, just by saving one well, you can get a return of your entire investment. So I'll be talking about surface monitoring. Surface monitoring is really our bread and butter. We monitor from the surface. We feel that we get the best results from monitoring from the surface. And we offer 2 options, a surface frac star and a near surface buried array. These 2 arrays are designed to have the same performance, but the frac star can be laid out really quickly. The arms are centered on the pad, but they are flexible, and they can go around any surficial noise sources, or if we have any issues with landowners that don't want us on their property, we can go around their property, for example. And like I said, this is a temporary array, where we also have the near surface buried array. This is, we drill geophones and put them down in about 300 feet down into below the surface. And this is intended to eliminate surface noise, but not drill down so deep that it's cost prohibitive. And by doing this, we can put in a lot less geophones than the frac star, which is right at the surface. And the great advantage to a surface array is that we get consistent detectability and event uncertainty under the array. So we can compare events from the toe of the well to the heel of the well, and from well to well, without having any issues about event detectability or uncertainty changes throughout under the array. And as the event occurs, and that P-wave radiation propagates up to the surface, we can see how that P-wave radiation pattern is reflected at the surface, and we can get focal mechanisms. And these focal mechanisms can be inverted to get an automatic moment tensor, full moment tensor inversion for every high quality event. And we're using that P-wave radiation pattern to get the orientation of these fractures. So for example, when we see 4 lobes of that P-wave radiation pattern, that is reminiscent or deterministic of this strike slip beach ball, where you see that we have compression, in this case in the white part of the focal mechanism, and you can always determine the orientation of the slip, where the movement is always going to the dark side. So from the white towards the dark, and in this case it would be a left lateral strike slip focal mechanism. And I'm going to be talking about these different strike slip and dip slip focal mechanisms in this presentation. And the difference is the strike slip is slipping in the direction of the strike of the fracture, whereas the dip slip is slipping in the direction of the dip of the fracture plane. And so I'm going to show a couple of the examples of these dip slip versus strike slip. The first one is the dip slip. Like I said, when that P-wave propagates from the event location up to the array, we'll see that half of the array for the dip slip will experience a negative polarity, or first motion down, whereas other half of the array will experience a first motion up. And that translates to this dip slip focal mechanism. And for this example, we're showing that raw data that's inverted for that dip slip mechanism. We see that the strike is a 78-degree strike. You can see it along this nodal plane with a steep dip about 88 degrees. And these are common during the virgin reservoir stress state, for example, in the Permian reservoir, where we see that initially when you treat stages, they fail as dip slip mechanisms. However, when you go to a neighboring wellbore, if the fractures extend to the previously treated area, the previously treated stage that's now experiencing a stress shadow effect, we see that the mechanisms, for example, in the Permian, are changing from this dip slip to strike slip. And what we see is that the strike is still 81 degrees. The previous one was 78 degrees, but it's showing that you're virtually causing failure along the same fractures, whether you're going stimulating in the virgin reservoir stress state or under the case where there's a stress shadow effect, but you're still causing slip on the same fractures. They're just initially they slipped as dip slip. But then you create that stress shadow on one well, and then you go to a neighboring well, and when they propagate back from the current stage that you're treating over to the well that's experiencing a stress shadow effect, we see that these mechanisms are changing from dip slip to strike slip. And this can be important in that it tells us where that stress shadow effect is occurring and how it's failing. And so we use those focal mechanisms. One of the ways we can use it is to create a fracture model of the area, or discrete fracture network model. And we orient the fractures by the strike and dip of the focal mechanism. We center them on the event, and then we can calculate the area of the slip plane using this formula, using the seismic moment or the magnitude of the event, as well as the shear modulus of the event at that location. So this is telling us the rock property at the depth of the event, and also paired with the displacement of the event. So the area is a function of the seismic moment, the shear modulus, and the displacement of the event. And so we can get that area of the slip plane, and then we can get the volume of the total of that fracture plane, or the volume that's created from that event along that fracture plane, by also calculating the aperture, how much that fracture is opening. And we initially estimate the aperture of the event based on the length of the fracture. This is taken from data measured in the field, where scientists have gone out and measured the length of the fracture, and the longer the fractures, the greater the amount of fracture opening. And so we use that empirical data to initially estimate how much that fracture is opening based on the length of the fracture. And then we refine that actual opening based on the actual full moment tensor. So in this graph, we're showing that dilation, or the volumetric percent that fracture is dilating, tends to be a function of the rake. So the normal dip slip mechanisms tend to dilate more than the strike slip mechanisms. And we then use that information to get more data to get the full total volume of every fracture. And the key thing at MicroSeismic, what we do is then we calibrate our fracture network by setting our total volume of our fractures equal to your total injected slurry volume minus what's leaking off into the formation. And the reason that we do this is because we don't detect every single microseismic event. Some are below our detection threshold, and it's important to calibrate the fracture network so that we know where you're creating volume in the reservoir. And then we can track where that volume is being created for each stage so that we can build out through this calibrated fracture network where your volume, where your proppant is going. So we're looking at where you're building fracture volume on a stage-by-stage basis, and honoring that where that fracture volume is being created to fill out that calibrated network with proppant. And so now I'm going to get into some examples. The first one's on decreased wellbore spacing. On the right, I'm showing microseismicity detected from 3 different wells that were being treated. This was monitored in the Eagleford. And you can see the 3 wells are targeting the Eagleford. Some of the energy is going shallow into the Austin Chalk. And you can see we monitored in real time. The way that they were being treated was they treated stage 1 of the 1H, followed by stage 1 of the 2H, and then stage 1 of the 3H. But they noticed in real time that the 1H is also the leading well, but has a longer lateral, and was out of sequence of the second 2 wells being treated. So they sped up the treatment of the 1H so that it was more in line with the direction of SH max. By the time half of the well was being treated, showing by this arrow. And what you see is that there was a lot of disorganization of the microseismicity when the sequence of the wells was not lined up. However, once they were lined up, due to the slightly staggered nature of the stage placement between the wells, you create some pressure around the well, and then around well 1, and then well 2 also creates a pressure that contains the fractures close to the well being treated. So initially you have this more disorganized pattern, but now once they're more in line, and due to the slightly staggered nature of the stages, we have events that are more closely located to the well of interest. We also, and so when we look at the fracture volume, we see that the events and fractures are concentrated about 250 feet around the wellbore, but these wells could have been drilled much closer together. Especially when we look at the propped fracture volume, there's a significant gap in between the wells drilled at this spacing. And when we look at the fractures, when you're compounding the pore pressures between the 3 wells and from stage to stage, we're seeing that we're even getting longer fractures as we go from toe down to the heel. But we could have, these wells could have been drilled a lot closer together, and maybe possibly even just add another wellbore per section. Instead of 3 wells per section, you could fit 4 wells in per section without having any overlap or between the wells, or without losing any production between the wells. So for this example, average cost of the survey was $215,000 per well, which is recovered after 9,300 barrels of oil equivalent produced at $70 oil, or after about 2 months of production. So moving forward, this operator, instead of drilling 3 wells per section, can drill 4 wells per section and save money. So now we're going to shift gears, and we're going to talk about frac hits. Frac hits are common in unconventional horizontal development. I'm showing a cross-sectional view of a parent well. The production from a parent well creates a zone of low pore pressure or pressure sink, and changes in geomechanical properties in this depleted area. And then when you drill an offset child well, the child well stimulation, once it intersects the depleted portion of the parent well, it will preferentially grow towards this pressure sink. And that preferential growth can create a compromised stimulated rock volume, or SRV, of the child well, and affect the production of the parent well. And so now I'll show an example of the microseismicity that we see when child wells are approaching the depletion around a parent well. So in this example, I'm showing it's in map view. We have a vertical parent well here and 2 horizontal child wells with SH max at about 80 degrees. We see that this stage was sufficiently far enough away from the parent well where it's not affected by that parent well. And that we see good symmetry of the events that propagate subparallel to SH max. And there was some interaction with child well B. And then as you get closer to the parent well, we see that this stage has some asymmetric fracture growth in the direction towards in the direction of SH max towards the parent well. And we also saw a slight increase in pressure of that parent well. And as you get closer to that parent well, we see this stage hit the vertical parent well. We also saw a large increase in pressure in that parent well. And subsequent stages, we see a lot of energy going into that vertical parent well, and even kind of the propagation direction bending towards that parent well. And so now you can see really the outline of where that depleted area around that vertical parent well exists, and maybe even potentially creating more fractures beyond that depleted area. So when we look in cross-sectional view, we see the majority of the child-parent interactions occur through the target formation, but this was a rare example where fluid entered the parent well port of the target zone, and when the pressure in the parent well eventually exceeded the refracturing pressure of the deepest target, we see additional microseismicity occurring deep into the formation. So what are the different types of frac hits? We have them listed here. There's poroelastic pressure hits. When you increase the fracture volume from your hydraulic fracture stimulation, you're actually increasing the volume around that fracture, which increases the stress on neighboring fractures. So you can create, and then when you stop pumping, there's a stress shadow that remains around that stage, which can influence your subsequent stages being treated, as well as offset neighboring wells that are being treated. And when you pressure up a stage, and then go to a neighboring stage and increase the pressure on that neighboring stage, that pressure between the two wells can coalesce and combine, which can cause fluid pressure communication from your second well being treated to combine with the pressure around the initially treated stage, which can cause pressure to propagate like a pressure a pressure wave going through the area that's already pressured up. So we can see pressure wave communication. And then in some instances, you increase the pressure and stress around one stage, but if it takes too long and to treat your offset neighboring well, that pressure can go away, but those fractures are still open. And so now when you treat your offset stage, you can actually have full-on fluid pressure going from one well over to the opposite well and have full fluid invasion, and in more extreme cases, proppant invasion from one well to the other. And so the results of these frac hits are temporary loss of production, permanent loss of production, poor stimulated rock volume development in the child well, or in more extreme cases, wellbore damage or complete loss of the well. And I have different frac mitigation strategies listed on the screen here, where it goes from red to orange to green, where the red examples are not very effective strategies for frac hit mitigation, and orange are somewhat effective, and green are very effective. So the ones that are not very effective are just shutting in the nearby parent well or abandoning the nearby parent well or keeping the parent well flowing during the child frac. What is somewhat effective are small preloads of the parent well or a full-on bullhead refrac of the parent well. But what's more effective are large preloads of the parent well or co-development of wells, talking zipper fracs or tank development. And so initially, I'm going to talk about bullhead refrac of the parent well. This is where you just go in and treat a parent well. So you have a whole parent well that was initially drilled and completed on a stage-by-stage basis and then depleted. And then they go in later on in time and re-stimulate the entire parent well without doing any isolation on a stage-by-stage basis. But what a lot of times what we see when they do this bullhead stimulation is that they just create microseismicity at the heel of the well. And in this case, they're also injecting diverter, but diverter alone does not solve the problem. Here's an example of an open hole section where they're injecting 18 stages of fluid with diverter, but we see that still, even though they're switching stages and changing the diverter, we still see that the majority of the microseismicity and fracturing is just occurring at the heel side of the open hole section. And when we look at different bullhead stimulations in different formations, these top two are from the Haynesville and this bottom one's from the Eagleford. It's this heelward bias is not restricted to a single formation. It's occurring in different formations. And the reason that this is occurring is that there's a high pressure contrast from the heel to the toe due to frictional losses along the wellbore. And so as you inject into this long open hole section, you have the highest pressure at the heel, then at the toe, and you get the fractures occurring where you have the higher pressures, and you never really get the toe high enough pressure to exceed the refracturing pressure of the rock. So you just blow out the heel of the well, and that's where we see all the microseismicity. And so if you're not monitoring, for example, with microseismicity or in real time and just doing some diagnostics like looking at your instantaneous shut-in pressure and you're monitoring from the surface, as you inject different stages, you'll see your ISIP going up, 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 and eventually exceeding your original ISIP of the formation. And so you assume once you've exceeded the ISIP of the formation that you're actually breaking new rock, and you assume that that's a success for refracturing the well, but in fact, you're just causing a blowout at the heel. And when we look at the injected volume as a function of microseismicity that's occurring, typically you have to inject between 10 and 40% of your total volume before we even see any microseismicity occurring, indicating that we have to kind of repressurize the reservoir to exceed that original ISIP of the rock to start causing fracturing in the subsurface. And so what are more effective frac mitigation strategies? We're talking a larger preloads of the parent well. And so what we're suggesting is that instead of just doing a single stimulation step, you introduce a step one pre-pressurization of the reservoir. So we're talking injecting a low rate, long duration pressurization to keep the pressure below the fracture closure pressure of the rock, which encourages repressurizing the entire lateral. So you're doing this low rate, long duration pressurization step to initially pressurize the heel of the well, and then you don't create any fractures, which allows that pressure to then go further down and fill up the midsection of the well, and then further down to the toe. And then you go in and do your actual stimulation step, which encourages stimulating the entire lateral of the wellbore. And this is best done during monitoring in real time. So we'll show an example from Equinor where they did just that. they refract these two orangish red wells that were parent wells, and then they immediately treated their offset child wells, and then followed by their further offset child wells. And they refract their parent wells first with a low rate prefill, followed by a bullhead stimulation of 1.5 million pounds of stand and 70,000 barrels of fluid with vendor diversion material. And these were completed in the Three Forks and the Bakken. And this shows their prefill injection. They injected for as much as 3.5 days with 30,000 barrels of fluid. Initial pre-fill was keeping their pressure below the shaded area, showing that they're keeping their pre-fill below the frac gradient of the rock. So they did not want the rock to break during this pre-fill. And then they followed that pre-fill up with their actual stimulation step. This shows the microseismicity occurring during the stimulation step using a frac star. And it's important to note that during that pre-fill, we did not see any microseismicity, indicating that they weren't breaking new rock during the initial pressurization step. However, during their stimulation step, we see microseismicity extending from the heel all the way down to the toe on both well A and B, with a larger amount of fractures occurring at the heel, indicating that they still were getting the greatest pressures at the heel than at the toe. And when you look at cumulative oil being produced, here's before they did their refrac, and then there's a bump in production after the refrac, indicating they had a successful refrac. And if we extend these two curves out, we can calculate EUR for the two different scenarios, before the refrac and after. And we see that we got as much as 50% bump in EUR on well A and 28% bump on well B. And so we had about 35% uplift overall. The average cost of this survey was $215,000 per well, which is recovered only after 3 months, or 3,000 barrels of oil equivalent produced at $70 oil, or just after 1 to 2 months of production. And the great thing is that preload also saves your child well. So here's a parent well, and this is without re-stimulating the parent well. It's showing the microseismicity that occurred during this offset child well. A lot of that microseismicity is wasted and fracturing and fluid going back to the previously to that parent well. So a large amount of asymmetric growth from that child well towards the parent well when that parent well is not re-stimulated. However, this shows an example where this parent well was re-stimulated, followed by this child well. This shows the microseismicity occurring during the child well, a lot less asymmetric growth towards that parent well. And you can see that that asymmetric growth was prevented all the way down to the toe, as well as down to the heel. And in this area along the heel, we also confirmed the same results from the surface as detected along this downhole array. And so when we look at the production from these child wells, we see that we get a better production from the child well with a parent well refrac. So this right curve is showing without the parent well re-stimulation. What it's showing is this black curve is your regional type curve, and it's showing your immediate child well production without re-stimulating the parent well tends to underperform with respect to the regional type curve. However, when you've re-stimulated that parent well successfully, now the immediate child wells are performing at about the same level as the regional type curve. So initially, without re-stimulating the parent well, production loss can be greater than 25%. However, with the re-stim of the parent well, you eliminate that 25% loss on that child well. So the average cost of this survey was $300,000 per well, which is recovered after 4,250 barrels of oil equivalent produced at $70 oil, or after 1 to 2 months of production. So now for my final example for frac hit mitigation strategies is co-development of wells, talking zipper fracs or tank developments. And so if you stimulate just well one, we tend to see, due to compounding pore pressures, that fracture length is growing from toe to heel, but can extend towards your next well being treated, which can push that well even further out of zone. But areas where you have overlapping fractures, that's where we see compounding pore pressures. We see stresses rotate, and focal mechanisms can change from dip slip to strike slip, for example, a normal stress regime. And so what we see is when you're leading with well one and well one is ahead of well two, we expect in a left lateral or counterclockwise rotation in SH max. So blue is your SH max. We see that you can get a left lateral rotation in SH max when well one is leading well two. And we see that initially events fail as these cool colors or virgin reservoir stress, but when you have fractures that are overlapping, which was more common in the heel, we are seeing that our mechanisms are changing from dip slip to strike slip, or going from these cool colors to red colors. And consequently, if you lead with this left well and your right well is trailing, you tend to expect a right lateral rotation in SH max. And consequently, if you have faults or different fracture sets that are preferentially aligned with this rotation, those fractures and faults could become more susceptible to failure during this rotation. So that rotation direction is dependent on the location of the trailing stage treated relative to the stress shadow from the leading well, and those fractures and faults preferentially aligned with that rotation direction are more critically stressed and susceptible to failure. So to illustrate this point, sometimes I like to stack stages that are treated the stage on top of one another, or reference them all to their stage center. That way we can create heat maps and of what a single representative stage would look like. So that's what I've done here. And what I'm saying is that stress shadow impact on neighboring wells is time dependent on the stage lag time. So we're showing 3 examples: an isolated well, a rapid stage lag time, and a long stage lag time. And we're showing the colors are associated with the focal mechanism, where it's cool colors are dip slip, and they're changing to red, which is altered stress state, showing where you have stress shadowing effects. So if you have an isolated well, treated, no other wells treated in the area, you have most of these cool colors indicating your rock is breaking as virgin reservoir stress state. All your fluid and proppant is located right around the well and stage being treated. Whereas if you have a rapid stage lag, you treat these outer wells, and then you go into the center well, you have a stress shadow on either side of your well, and you can take advantage of that by sandwiching your fluid and proppant in between these stress shadows on either side of the wellbore. Whereas if you wait too long and that stress shadow has time to dissipate, for example, in this lower example, it shows a cross-sectional view. The shallow well was initially treated, and then 18 days later, they go in and treat this deeper well. Well, there was a stress shadow around the shallow well, but that stress shadow has dissipated. Now when you inject fluid to stimulate your deeper well, all your fluid and proppant is just going back to your previously treated stage, and you're losing a lot of fluid to your previously treated well. And so this is similar to like a parent-child effect, where you where you have a lot of fractures that are opened around the initial well that's being treated and subsequent wells and stages that are being treated, you can lose a lot of fluid if you take too much time and the stress shadow has gone away. And so QEP learned from this experience, and they figured out that they can take advantage of these pressure walls and separate their producing wells from wells that are being completed. And then they also have a buffer that minimizes the interference between completed and drilled wells. So they call it tank development. They have these pads of wells or tanks of wells that are being treated. They complete them in a top-down pattern to prevent to create a stress shadow on the top wells to prevent shallower wells from migrating upward. And they leave a pressure wall in between wells that are being completed and wells that are being produced. So these would be wells that were just stimulated and completed, but they don't allow them to be put on production while the neighboring pad is being completed. That way there's a pressure wall dividing the pad of wells that's being completed from the wells that are being produced. And then they have a buffer where no wells are being drilled or completed. And then number 5 shows where they're drilling and completing these current wells, or they're drilling these wells. So the idea is to have this pressure wall to minimize effects from their completed wells to propagate back towards their producing wells and minimize frac hits on their parent wells. And they also have shown that they get a bump in production on subsequent wells that are being completed in this sequence. So well 1, 2, 3, and 4, they're compounding pore pressures from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and they're getting more bang for their buck, more fractures, and also better production as they propagate their pressure from well 1 to the 4th well being treated in the sequence. And so it maintains a supercharged reservoir pressure during the completion and minimizes the risk of interference between the completed wells and the producing wells. And they get a bump of production as much as 35% in EUR by doing this. And the average cost of the survey was $200,000 per well, which is recovered after about 1.5 months of production. So my final example is on real-time solution where faulting can be identified in real time by the focal mechanisms. And we can see that these faults, in this case, originating in the lower Eagleford and propagating towards the well, are colored blue. We can color the faulting events by their focal mechanisms, so you can easily distinguish them from their frac events. And for example, in this case, the frac events are colored blue. The fault events are colored red. And you can see that these red faulting events are not aligned with the 3D seismic, but they can extend from one well to the next. So you can very clearly see the track of this fault as it extends towards your next wells that are being treated. And when you identify these in real time, they can change how the wells are being treated or skip the stages and eliminate the well from experiencing this strike slip activity and minimize the risk of deformation of their wellbore due to the faulting. And by doing this, they can reduce de-risk as much as $2.3 million per well. So I showed all these different examples, and overall we show that we got a return of investment right around the 1 to 2 month mark, or by avoiding losing production from just one single wellbore casing deformation, that we can get a return of investment just by saving that one well. So please contact me if you have any questions. I've got my contact information here. And please don't hesitate to reach out and get in touch with me. So thanks
Well,
for your
thank,
attention.
well, thank you, John. Most interesting. Lots of different stuff there. We covered a lot of geography, a lot of geology, and a lot of different cases. I've not received any questions from the public yet. Perhaps it's all been just abundantly clear, but certainly the Q&A is open. So please type your question in there or raise your hand if you'd like to do the question orally. John, in that last case where you were talking about these strike slip events and how a rotation of the stresses could cause one of those to be excited. Perhaps as the stress rotates, it gets aligned in a way that makes that event critical. I guess I've got two questions for you. If you knew the fault was there, I suppose you could do something, but are there cases where you don't know the fault is there? Are these strike slip faults sometimes not detected on the seismic data? And secondly, if you start to see them moving, is it not too late? If you see the microseismicity showing you the strike slip, doesn't that mean you're done for?
Yeah, those are great questions, Peter. And yeah, as you can see, this is showing the 3D seismic. They were expecting perhaps some rather large faulting to be aligned with the 3D seismic. However, the faults that we saw were not aligned with the 3D seismic. So it was important to do this monitoring to see the faulting with this orientation. And yes, if you are monitoring in real time, you see that fault is occurring. Sometimes it's occurring outside or away from the wellbore, and it is moving and approaching the well, and you can see the orientation that it's taking towards your well. So you can skip those stages that are next in line to be treated, or change your treatment style. The other way is you can very clear, you can almost take a red Sharpie and extend these stages to where you're drilling your future wells. And maybe instead of having your heels of the wells over here, maybe you make it so your toe of the well is out of the alignment of this faulting, so that you don't cause the heels of your wells to get deformation. Because if you deform the heel of your well, you can lose the entire production of that well, or even the whole pad.
That's interesting. So, are you aware, and I know we're going to hear more about this from Molly Turco, the Devon geologist, next month, but are you aware in your practice, in MicroSeismic Inc.'s practice, of clients who are using just what you described, looking at the data in real time and skipping stages if they feel they're putting their wellbore at risk?
Yeah, absolutely. And some people, especially in the Austin Chalk, are really putting a lot of effort into doing this and monitoring every stage and every well, because they find that this is absolutely critical to avoiding faulting and avoiding deformation in their well bores, and are
Cool.
skipping stages and doing just that.
Cool. So Jess Cosman raised his hand. So Hannah, do you want to make it so that Jess can be heard and he can ask a question? I think Jess, you have the ability to unmute yourself.
Yes, I believe I do. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
can. Go ahead.
Perfect. Thanks. I did put a question in the Q&A. I don't know if maybe it was disabled at the beginning if you aren't getting any questions. But John, my question is, with all of this continuous reservoir monitoring going on, what kind of data volumes are we talking about generating from microseismic surveys over these densely packed horizontal fields? I mean, does the management of the data volume become a cost and effort issue as well?
Well, we can store the data in the cloud, and we have different ways to process that data on our servers, so that we don't have any issues with processing in real time at all. But there definitely are very large volumes, and we have to manage that accordingly. But we've taken the initial steps to set up our servers and process in a way that we don't have any data management issues.
Okay, we talking, what kind of volumes are we talking about? We're talking tens of terabytes, hundreds of terabytes? Do you know?
Peter, you might know the answer to that better than me. What do you think?
Well, it depends on how many days we monitor, but it's more like the
Yeah.
tens of terabytes than
Yeah,
hundreds.
okay. All right. Makes sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So it turns out that it looks like Hannah turned on the questions, because now I see another question here. We have a question from Darren Aldridge, and I'm going to read it, John, for your response. It says, when doing the low rate pressuring up, in one particular example, was microseismic monitoring done in real time and used to stop the pressuring when you saw the first events occur, or was the closure pressure known beforehand and they just pressured up below that rate? In other words, was it done actively using real-time microseismic, or in fact, did you observe something after the fact and proved that they were keeping below the fracture gradient?
Yeah, great question. And it was done in real time, and the frac gradient, as shown in this yellowish area, was known ahead of time. They did try to keep their pressures below the frac gradient, but we were also monitoring in real time and we did not see any activity occurring during this pre-pressurization step. And so that was an indication that they were able to monitor their pressures, and they did know their frac gradient, but they were also able to monitor in real time to make sure that we didn't see any activity, so that they were not breaking the new rock.
So, John, I'm kind of interested in this pressure dependent, the change in the stress, or time dependent change in
Time
the
dependency.
Yeah. Do you have any other evidence besides microseismic for this time dependency of the stress shadowing?
Yeah, that's a good question. And here's another example where we had tracer, and the tracer's shown as in these colors. So well 1 is green. It shows that they recovered tracer not only from well 1, but over on well 2 and well 3. And then what's interesting is the final well in the treatment, well 7, they recovered tracer well over here. So the idea was, initially there was a parent well treated here. It's the same sort of thing. You treat your child well. This was not pressured up, so their frac went to the east here, and all their tracer went that same direction. It set up a chain reaction where well 2 was treated next, followed by 3 and 4 and 5, and all the tracer went to the east. Then they treated well 6, and finally they got back to well 7, which was treated. Well 7 was treated 14 days after well 1. Well, now that stress shadow around well 1 dissipated, and their tracer went as much as 2,000 feet away through the whole system that had been previously treated. But that stress shadow had gone away, and we saw tracer extending as much as 2,000 feet away.
So I suppose this stress shadow change over time, I think you mentioned it's related to leak-off rates. These rocks are pretty impermeable. So what sort of factors are influencing the time dependency, or the decrease in stress shadow and dissipation over time?
Yeah, another good question. We have to take a step back and look and say, hey, what are the pre-existing conditions in the area? How many wells have already been treated and fracked and produced from? What's really happening in this area is, when you stimulate a well, a lot of these fractures are linking up thousands of feet with other fractures that have already occurred during the stimulation of all these other wells in the area. and there's all this depletion that has already occurred. So when you link up these fractures to all these other parent wells and depleted parent wells in the area, you've linked up these fractures, allowing these pathways so that this pressure can rapidly dissipate and discharge into this depleted into this depleted reservoir. So I think that's why this dissipation occurs so rapidly. If you just drilled a single well with no other wells in the area, the pressure in the stress shadow would probably be retained for several months. But because it can link up with all these other fractures, it can dissipate quite quickly. We're finding on the order of somewhere between 7 and 14 days that stress shadow can dissipate.
Very good. Well, that makes sense, John. So I think we've reached our time, and I want to thank all of you out there in Radio Land for attending, and thank you, John, for taking time to prepare this talk and present it to us. I'm sorry we've got in the way of your kayaking time this Thursday morning over there in Tennessee.
No worries.
I want to remind everybody of our talk next month, August 21st, with Dr. Molly Turco from Devon Energy, where she's going to talk more about this strike slip faulting and how it can affect wells and cause loss of well bores. I want to remind you as well that all of these talks are available on our website. John's will be posted shortly, the recording of this. And I believe, Hannah, that we have a place where a QR code where you can register for our talk for the very next talk coming up. Well, for the next one or for the rest of them. As I said, we're having good response to this, and we're planning now already. We've booked our first talk for next year, for February of next year. So with that, I'll thank you again and say goodbye for this month, and I look forward to seeing you in August. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye.